Welcome to New Mexico's National Speakers Association chapter, Speakers Corner. I'm Gail Rubin, a past president of our local chapter of the National Speakers Association. And this is an opportunity for us to talk with our members and for you to learn about the speaking business and how you can get involved and how we all got involved. I'm so happy to have with me today Bob Mason, who is one of our members of NSA New Mexico, and glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and every day on this side of the sod is a good day.
Glad to be anywhere. You bet.
So how did you come to be a speaker, and what do you focus on?
I've been speaking since I was about 2 years old.
Yes, a professional speaker.
Not always by anybody's request. I enjoy getting in front of audiences and providing information for people, and I've done that for a number of years. When I retired from the Air Force, I decided this is something I really wanted to do, to actually make this a profession, to make this a business. And it is a business, and that's something I had to learn. It's because I really enjoy doing it. And I think in this business, if you don't enjoy doing it, you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway.
Yeah. And you focus on leadership. Mm-hmm. And that's a very popular topic in the speaking field.
That's right. That's right. So let me speak to you about leadership.
Why did you decide to focus on leadership development?
You know, I've been so fortunate to have worked for, with, and around a lot of really good leaders. And I saw what that does for a team, for an organization. And unfortunately, I've also had the opportunity to see some kind of bad leaders. And I've seen what that does to a team and organization.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take what I've learned about leading teams and help others become more effective in a leadership role. And that's what I really enjoy doing.
And you mentioned you were in the Air Force, so you have a military background. And military leadership and business leadership, are they different? Are they similar? How do you tie that together?
Well, you know, if you're one who watches the old World War II movies, and you see in the military everybody yelling at each other and all of that, and you may think that's what military leadership is, but it really isn't, at least not in my experience, not today. The military has really learned how to develop their people, which is one of the key aspects of good leadership. They learn how to make good leaders. One of the things that's really important that the military does, that I wish corporate America would do more, is leadership development. They start very early. My first leadership type course, class, whatever, I'd been in maybe a year when I got that first one. In a 30-year career, I've been to 10 different leadership courses, and that's not including the daily mentoring and coaching that you get. So that leadership development that the military uses is why the military is as effective as they are, and that's what I'd like to see corporate America adopt.
So how do you develop a leader? You're going to talk about that.
I am.
Yes, one of the wonderful things about this program is the first half is our conversation. The second half is going to be Bob getting up and speaking. And you'll get to see that with all of the NSA New Mexico members that we have on Speakers Corner. So,
Yep.
Speaking of National Speakers Association, how long have you been involved, and what has that done for your business?
I've been involved in one way or another with NSA, both the national and the state level, since I think about 2009.
I think we started about the same time.
About the same time,
yeah.
And what has NSA done? NSA is an amazing organization. I don't think I've ever seen any professional organization that operates like NSA does. You go to a conference with NSA and there's hundreds or thousands of other speakers who will sit down with you and talk about their business. And they'll tell you what they do and what they've done that works and what doesn't work and what might work for you and how can I help you. And I've done that with speakers who are in the same area that I am. But it's that NSA philosophy that don't fight over the piece of the pie, make the pie bigger. There's plenty of opportunity out there for everybody. Yeah. So it's a fantastic organization. And frankly, just about everything I know about the speaking business came from NSA.
Yeah. And then, of course, we had our local Speakers Academy,
right,
where we help teach people who want to get into the business to learn those different aspects.
Well, and as a plug for our meetings, speakers from around the world, or around the country, we've actually had international speakers a couple of times, will come to the local chapter at no cost other than travel. These are people who would make 5-figure incomes from speaking for an hour, and they will come and spend a day with us and help us learn what they know. It's incredible. And every time we have a meeting, which is at least every month, one of those speakers is telling us about their business. And like I said, it's an amazing organization.
Yeah, how to run your business and also how to be a better speaker.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So your company is called Daedalus Group?
Daedalus Group.
Daedalus Group.
Right.
What's the meaning of that?
If you're not familiar with Greek mythology, you may not know what that means. But you've probably heard the story of Daedalus and Icarus.
I've heard of Icarus,
all right,
yes.
You've heard of Icarus. That's interesting. He's the guy that failed. But anyway, in the story, Daedalus and his son Icarus are trapped in this labyrinth by King Minos. The only way out is through a window that's way up on a cliff. So Daedalus gets this idea, and he starts collecting bird feathers and wax. And he builds wings out of these bird feathers and wax. And he has wings for him and wings for his son. And he tells Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun because the wax will melt. Icarus was a young boy, so what did he do? He flew too close to the sun, and he crashed and burned. But Daedalus made it, and from that point, Daedalus is kind of known as the father of flight. So our company, myself, and I have a business partner in Colorado, Steve Altop, the two of us have this aviation background, so it seemed like a natural name, so that's why the Daedalus Group.
Okay, and part of that idea of getting up higher so you can escape the walls of the
well, we say
labyrinth?
That, help you escaping the labyrinth of bad leadership.
Okay.
Right.
And you've written 4 books in your career. Yeah. Let's talk about your books.
Okay, I'd like to do that.
I know you wrote about the generations in the workplace, but you're saying this is kind of obsolete at this point?
It kind of is.
Why?
It's terrible. Don't buy this book. It's at Amazon. I wrote this book in 2010.
Okay.
In 2010, we still had 5 generations of people in the workplace. And that included people from the GI generation, the World War II generation. And so there was a really kind of odd dynamic in the workplace. And I had experienced this, and I thought it was a good idea to kind of explain where each generation's coming from and how we could approach that, which in 2010 I think was a legitimate thing to do. At that point, that GI generation was starting to fade away, but they still had control of a large percentage of the world's wealth, and they controlled a lot of the large companies. So it was kind of important to know who they were. Unfortunately, we're losing that generation very quickly, and the work dynamic has changed. I no longer tell leaders that they need to understand the generations. I tell them they need to understand the people. Because it doesn't really matter when you were born. It has a lot more to do with where you were raised, what culture you came from. Somebody who was born in Los Angeles at the same time somebody was born in Wyoming, Illinois, where I went to high school with the 42-person graduating class. All right? Those are very, very different upbringings.
Yeah.
So a leader doesn't need to pay attention to generations. They need to pay attention to the people.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of good information in here, though.
Good. Well, you also have The Art of Not
I
Motivating,
do.
but that's a novel?
It is.
I didn't know that.
It is. I was writing a book about one of my absolute most important points I like to make is that leaders cannot motivate people, but they do need to create a motivational environment. Turn it like that. And how do you do that? So I was writing a book on how you do that. A regular business book. It was so bad it put me to sleep. And I was still writing it.
Okay.
I said, this is terrible. Can't do that. So I've read several books by a gentleman named Eliyahu Goldratt. And he writes books on the theories of constraints. Another topic that could be extremely painfully boring, but he wrote it in a novel format. And he's written several books that way. And I said, this is the way to get the point across. And so this is a novel about a woman that owns or runs a factory right here in Albuquerque. It's all fiction. And the factory is about to be closed down because it's not doing very well. And she comes to the leadership expert in town. We won't say who that was. And he helps her through my model of how to create that motivational environment.
Okay.
So that's how it got written as a novel.
And don't worry, you can do this. And planning to excel,
Yeah.
where can people get your books?
These three books, don't worry, Art of Not Motivating and Balancing Generations, you can get those at any bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. This one, Planning to Excel, is actually the first book I wrote. And it is a workbook that I use when doing strategic planning. And it's no longer in print as far as the big publishers are concerned. You have to get it from me. But you can do that.
And you can email Bob
Bob at theleadershipgroup.com.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'd also like to mention that we're also in a Toastmasters club together, Albuquerque Challenge Toastmasters.
Right.
And this is a great opportunity to practice the material that we want to present in our speeches. So
Right.
shout out to Albuquerque Challenge Toastmaster Club.
You bet. Yeah.
And you can find that online as well. And now we get to hear you speak. We're going to take a little break, and Bob's going to transition over to the speaking stage, and we'll get a taste of some of Bob's leadership advice and information.
Okay.
And stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.
Authentic management talent is rare. Gallup's research shows that just 1 in 10 have the natural, God-given talent to manage a team of people. Another 2 in 10 have some characteristics of functioning managerial talent. It's from the introduction to The State of the American Manager by the Gallup Corporation. And I want to tell you, this is just absolutely wrong. I've been leading teams and developing leaders for more than 40 years. And I've become absolutely convinced that there is no genetic makeup, no particular strand of DNA that makes you a good leader. In fact, I've discovered that there are really only 2 requirements to being a good leader. First, you need to have a real, genuine desire to be a good leader. And second, you need to be willing to learn the skills and the techniques of good leadership. That's it. And I have found that if you follow those 2 fundamentals, just about anybody can become a good leader. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Leadership development, this business that I'm in, is a really crowded field. If you go on Amazon, you're going to find over 60,000 books about leadership, each trying to tell you how to be a leader, what you need to do. And they make it complicated because here's the thing. If you want to be known as the expert, if you want to have the best-selling book, if you want to be considered the thought leader, you have to come up with something new. And that's the problem. There really isn't anything new in leadership. 5th century BC, it's a young prince named Cyrus. Cyrus combines the Median and the Persian kingdoms and creates the Persian Empire, one of the largest empires in history. It stretched from India to the Mediterranean. Now, in order to create an empire like that, Cyrus needs an army, a big army. So to do that, he has to bring soldiers in from all these different kingdoms and cities. And that's a challenge. But Cyrus applies good leadership skills, good techniques to help all these people come in and create teams that are effective. And he helps the leaders of his army understand how to be good leaders, how to put these teams together into an effective organization. Cyrus was so effective that if he showed up to the gates of your city, you probably threw open the gates and welcomed him in. Because, well, he did have that huge army, and it was a fearsome force. But everybody also knew, because Cyrus had a reputation, that when he came into your city, things were probably going to get better. Because Cyrus used the same techniques, the same skills to help the local civic leaders become better, which helped the cities become better. He was so well thought of that 100 years later, a Greek historian by the name of Xenophon wrote a book called Cyrus the Great, and he talks about all of these leadership skills and techniques that Cyrus used. That book is still available today. It's called Cyrus the Great, and the most current one is edited by a gentleman named Larry Hedrick, and I strongly recommend you get that book and read it, Cyrus the Great, and you'll learn all about the leadership skills, the techniques that he used. And the thing of it is, those are the same skills, the same techniques that we teach today, without the violence. There's really nothing new in leadership. But what is new and what's different is how you apply those skills, how you use those techniques in your own situation. Every team is different. Every one of you has a different challenge. You have to apply those skills in a way that works for your team. And the best way to do that is to really have a good understanding of what those skills and techniques are. So what is this leadership? What am I really talking about here? Well, if you go back to those 60,000 books, you'll find a lot of definitions about leadership. And some of them get very complex, and they're often accompanied by a model. And it's usually a pretty complicated model. It has all the circles and the arrows and the triangles and all the things you're supposed to have, usually platforms and columns holding up big Gothic roofs. They're really nice, but they're also unnecessary. Because leadership, at its very basic core, is simply getting things done through people. That's what leadership is, getting things done through people. Now, when you read those books, you're also going to probably hear comments about leadership versus management. You know, he's okay as a manager, but he's just really not a leader. And she has okay management skills, but just isn't a leader. Here's the thing. If you're responsible for what other people do, you are, by default, a leader. If you're responsible for what other people do, you are a leader. Management is a function of leadership. All leaders have management responsibilities. But the main thing they're responsible for is what other people do, and that's why they're leaders. We have at the Daedalus Group spent a lot of time and effort studying what makes good leaders, both from our own experiences of leaders that we worked with, around, and for. And we've also studied a lot of the leaders you've probably heard of, the famous people, the people that lead large companies. And we found that there is some commonality. There are 3 characteristics that we find in all really good leaders. The first is being values-based. Good leaders know who they are. Have you ever worked for a leader who tried to convince you that they were something that they really weren't? And how long did it take you to figure that out? Probably not very long. As a leader, you need to know who you are, and that's who you need to be. So you need to know what your values are. Somewhere, probably not far from you, somebody is trying to sell drugs to your kids. We hear about that, and we hear terrible things on the news. And then we hear people say, well, that person just doesn't have any values. But that's not correct. Because everybody has values. They just may not agree with yours. And that's why it's important for you to make sure that you know what your values are and that you can explain that to your team. Your team needs to know your values because that's what drives your behavior. That's what makes you do things or not do things. Your values. So a leader is values-based. A leader is also purpose-driven. What's the purpose of the team? Why does it exist? I'll tell you what, when I work with teams, when I do planning with companies, it is amazing how many cannot tell me precisely what the purpose of the team is. And I know you may not believe me. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, but it's true. I've seen it so many times. Why is that? I think it's 2 reasons. One is that the team's been around for a long time. It's had a lot of turnover, so the original people aren't there anymore, and all that corporate knowledge has kind of gotten lost. On the other hand, and actually unfortunately more common, teams were never told in the first place. Sure, everybody on the team knows what their job is. They know what they're supposed to do. But do they know how that affects the rest of the team? what that has to do with why the team exists, why the company exists. Your team members need to know this. They need to know the purpose of the team, and they need to know what they do to make that happen. They need to know why they're valuable to the team, and they need to know that you know why they're valuable to the team. A good leader has to be purpose-driven. And the third characteristic is a good leader has to be people-centric. The people are the ones that make you successful. They are your team. Ask yourself this question. Do I see my people as an expense, or are they an investment? I hope you said investment, because that's what they are. And you, as a leader, need to nurture that investment. You need to understand your people. You need to know them. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How can you help them? How can you help them be more successful so they can help the team be more successful? Be people-centric. The three characteristics: values-based, purpose-driven, people-centric. Those are the characteristics we found really in all good leaders. Remember, if you're responsible for what other people do, you are a leader. Because leadership is getting things done through people. So the only question is, are you a good leader? Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That was inspiring. I'm ready to be a leader now. Well, thank you for joining us for our initial episode of Speakers Corner with NSA New Mexico, the National Speakers Association New Mexico chapter. We have regular meetings in Albuquerque, both in person and online, and hybrid meetings. Do check us out at our website, NSA-NM.org, and do come back for our next conversation. We have a number of fascinating speakers who live here in New Mexico, and you'll get a taste of what they do and how we do it, and I hope to see you next time.